Well, hello, friends, and welcome into another episode of the Marriage Talk Podcast. It is great to have you with us. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button and share the link with other couples in your world, especially with today's topic at hand. This is an important one, to say the least. Not that others are not, but this one is the one that could cause you to blush a little bit, right? So, Bill Hobson here, joined as always by Jay and Laura LaFoon, and you can find out all sorts of information on their ministry at jayandlaura.com. And I'm going to let the two of you introduce our two special guests. We've got multiple Zoom things happening all over the country today to bring together some experts in a field we all could use some expertise in.
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, I want to say how important the topic is that we're going to be talking about. But more than that, I want to express to our listeners how the genuine affection that Laura and I have for Michael and for Shaunti. These are amazing people. They do amazing work, but they're friends, they're coworkers, and I can't say enough wonderful things about them. Give you a little background. Shaunti is one of the nation's leading researchers, especially in the area of Christian relationships. Translation, she's really smart. Okay, I'll just say that. And then Michael is just been gifted by the Lord to talk very frankly about a subject that most of us don't know really how to talk about without, as Bill said, without blushing. So we're going to jump right in. Tell us, guys. Okay, I keep getting the name of the book, The Secrets of Sex in Marriage.
And marriage.
The Secrets of Sex and Marriage, or in marriage?
Yes, and marriage.
So some would say that sex and marriage, that's kind of an oxymoron, right? I mean, in some religious circles, it's like, well, what? But this is such an important work that you've done. Tell us what made you begin to even think about writing a book on this subject.
Go for it, Shaunti.
Well, thinking about writing a book on the subject and actually doing all the research and doing the book was a completely different thing. As researchers, my husband, Jeff, and I, we talk to tons of people. We do all these big nationally representative studies. And in marriage, this subject came up a lot. And we knew that we needed to tackle it. But there was no way in the world that we were going to be able to tackle it well in our usual process, because this is one of those topics that if we got something slightly wrong, like, you can do damage in people's lives. And Dr. Mike Sytsma had been one of our advisors on this topic whenever we did any of the research for years and years and years. And so we're like, how would you feel about doing a co-authored and co-researcher book together? And he was gracious enough to spend 3 years with us doing the research and whatever, because Dr. Sytsma is one of the leading sex therapists in the country and has trained many of the Christian sex therapists out there. So
yes, and Michael, we've known you for a long time. Respect what you do, because it is such a important topic, and yet, as Shaunti's already just said, it can be something that trips people up really quickly.
Right.
And I just want to first of all thank you guys for this book. I am a little mad because you didn't write it 35 years ago. When all of these questions that we've got here were questions that we were wrestling through.
35, that means you're assuming 5 have been.
Well, we had a few in there that
married 40.
We've been married 40 years.
Couple weeks, but anyway.
Hey, congrats. That's awesome, you guys.
Well, it's funny because when it comes to sex, most Christians do not get an education into how this thing is supposed to work. And that's the worst thing in the world, because the world has really perverted it, but God has made it to be something amazing and beautiful. And there's not enough adjectives to describe it when it's done between a husband and a wife with love as the intent. So kind of give us a ground level look at what we're going to talk about here.
Mike?
So let me just emphasize a bit of what you're saying there, Jay. I stepped into this from the pastoral background, having served in pastoral staff for a long time, and trying to bring the message of the gospel to where people are hurting. And marriage and sexuality is an area that people are hurting. So I kept going back and getting training in how to unpack scripture for what's going on in people's lives, because like you said, so many couples wrestle with these kind of questions. So many couples experience significant levels of pain in the area of sexuality in their relationship or in their lives, and I know scripture has the answers for it. So how do we unpack that? That meant going back and I counted up recently for somebody. I have over 2,400 hours of formal training in sexuality to prepare me to do some of this work. And scripture has an awful lot to say about it. Scripture gives us some of the guidance, and yet a dominant historical message from the church has been it's too sacred, don't talk about it. Let's keep it in the bedroom where it belongs, which is not a bad approach, other than we're not doing, as Paul said, we're not training each other up in the way to be good husbands and wives. And so we do have information, we do have knowledge, continue to develop it through researchers like Shaunti and myself who dig in to figure out what truth really is, and to present that to people. And we
Well,
learn some pretty cool things.
well, I was just going to say that. And
Mhm.
the amazing thing is that we really felt, and when I say we, not just Mike, but also my husband, who, as he said, good Midwestern boy, I don't want my name on a book about sex. But the three of us did all the research and all the writing together. But one of the things we were really purposeful about investigating, digging into, was we knew that we wouldn't be able to kind of cover the waterfront. And Dr. Mike has done some of that work in other books and in other work that he's done. We really wanted to focus specifically on what are the areas that the average couple just doesn't realize that they're getting tripped up, like that they're maybe believing myths, that they don't know how to talk to their spouse. And what are those like key, we call them kind of high leverage areas where just a little bit of new knowledge can like, whoo, like make a huge difference. So that's what we were trying to uncover. And as Mike said, we found some cool stuff.
So can you share with us what I mean, I don't know how long we have and how long it'll take, but those key areas that do trip couples up.
Oh, for sure. Well, okay. Can we just say right up front, like when you talk about what are some of the key surprises and stuff, nothing that we found surprised Mike.
There was
Like,
one thing.
2,400 hours of
there's one thing out of
Yeah.
3 years of research and thousands of data points. Like there was one thing that surprised him. But actually, if you don't mind, Mike, I'll just jump in because
Yep.
everything surprised me. I was like, really? Really? So I'll tell you one of the big ones. And this is one of the ones I think, Mike, I think you'd agree with this, that this is one of those areas that it's just a little shift, and yet it's like, whoa, like this thinking about things differently. We, it turns out, have, without recognizing it, kind of a Hollywood-based idea of what sex actually looks like what it is. And that might sound funny, but think of it like when you see in a movie or maybe read a book, usually the presentation is that the guy and the girl look at each other across the room and there's a spark, there's like a hunger, right? And pretty soon they start kissing and their clothes are off and they're in bed. And so we think that's how sex works. And, you feel this hunger, you do something about it. And if it doesn't work that way in your house, you think something's broken. Like, I don't feel that, so I'm broken. Or my spouse doesn't do that, so she's broken or he's broken. And what we actually found in the research is that, okay, maybe something could be medically broken or whatever, but in most cases, it's literally just that we have this idea that there's this one type of desire and there's actually two main types of desire. And so the way that Dr. Mike, the way that he kind of framed it, which do you mind if I just keep going and explain this, Mike?
Please
And then you
go
can
for
fill
it.
it in. So the way that we explain it is, think of the Hollywood idea. That's one type of desire. You could call it initiating desire. It's someone who feels that sense of desire, wants to do something about it, maybe thinks about sex a lot, maybe is ready at a moment's notice. Now, guess who tends to be more likely statistically to have initiating
Like, yeah.
desire? I
Hang on,
know.
just give us a
This is
second here. We'll think.
really, really hard to think about who that might be. Now, there are plenty of exceptions to that, which we can get into, but that tends to be more likely to be men. I think it was about 6 in 10 men.
These people are aware of the hunger,
Yes,
and then they will pursue it.
they'll and kind of have
Mhm.
that desire to pursue it, which is what we see, right, in the movies or whatever.
And
But
get hurt and bent out of shape that if their spouse doesn't experience the same hunger for them.
Right, right.
Mhm.
yes. And so the second Laura's like, let me
Frame the face.
Yes, okay.
That's me.
So anyone listening to the audio, just know that Laura just framed Jay's face on this. Okay. So, but there is a second type of desire. There's more than the two, which Mike can explain, but the second main type of desire you could call receptive desire. And here is what just astonished me once I started like realizing what Mike was saying and what we were seeing in the data, is that it turns out the person with receptive desire in general kind of feels desire physiologically in the reverse order. The person with receptive desire, you tend to like make a decision to get engaged with your spouse, and you don't feel that sense of hunger right up front. And after your body starts being stimulated, and Mike can explain the physiology behind it, but assuming that this is like a positive experience, assuming this is all, by the way, this whole conversation is assuming this is generally a good relationship. We're not talking about
Loving, caring. Yep.
abusive situations, right? But in general, once the receptive desire person, once that physiology starts getting stimulated and they kind of view that as positive, at some point, they may then start feeling that sense of desire that their spouse felt 10 minutes ago. And so now Jay is framing Laura's face. Yes.
You've just described us.
Well, and here's the thing. Okay, there's a reason for this, right? The majority of couples fit into this category of, one person has initiating, one person has receptive desire. And the issue that causes the conflict, I guess, often is that the person who has receptive desire, which tends to be the wife, about, I think it's 73% of women have receptive desire. But that person, whether it's the wife or the husband, you just have to be approached differently. Like that person has to know what you've got on your menu for the evening before you get to the bedroom. Like that person needs a little flirting over breakfast so that, they know what you're interested in happening. And that anticipation time, then they're not kind of surprised when they're like, oh, I'm so glad it's the end of the day, falling into bed because the kids have been so crazy. And then like, wait, what? Okay. Like you have to get yourself into that frame of mind.
Laura threatened to write a book during that stage of our life entitled "Why Is Everyone Crawling on Top of Mommy?"
Right.
Yeah, because I mean,
Still gonna be written. It's got its outline. It just hasn't been. But what you're saying, Shaunti, is so true because I mean, we're laughing and framing each other's faces because it's true. But what you were just talking about, you need to let your spouse know what's on the menu, because what he would do is he falls, we're watching TV, it's 9 o'clock at night. He'd take a little nap, he'd fall asleep. And so I go upstairs, we're going to bed, and I'm like, I'm going to get to go to sleep. And he wakes up and he would like, I just took a little nap. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way, dude. You can't take a nap and fall asleep downstairs and then come upstairs to the bedroom and think something's going to happen. That's just not going to work.
Yeah.
well, it's interesting because maybe we'll get to this, but different stages of your life. I mean, we got married fairly young. I was 23, she was 22. And as a 23-year-old young man, my expectations, we were going to have sex all the time.
Silly
Right.
boys.
And Laura grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, a sweet, innocent Southern belle, and her expectation was that we were going to have sex in June. I mean, basically, so our expectation levels were so different coming into it, and especially as young, when you're young and you have not had any training sounds so pedestrian,
because you don't talk about it in church. I mean, I grew up in church. I had a great youth group, and in February they talk about love and sex, but it was don't have it, because you're teenagers.
Of course.
Yeah, so that was the extent of, I mean, my mother didn't even talk about what was going to happen. I mean, that was just, you just didn't talk about it. I was like, good, I'm just going into this blind, I guess. I have no idea.
There are so many messages that we are intentionally or unintentionally taught in various cultures, including church culture. You mentioned Northern culture versus Southern culture. We work with people around the world. Each culture teaches something different. And as Shaunti mentioned, often it's a fairly high level of mythology. Even when it's not, that disconnect, the inability to communicate about it, which we'll talk about in a bit, comes into play, and we misunderstand each other. And Jay, you're not, the story you told there is, you're not, the language I use is being seductive. You're not drawing your wife into this space. You just expect her to have that same initiating type of a hunger that you have. Well, why wouldn't she have that? That's normal. Well, for you, it is normal. So you expect it is for everybody, but it's not. And to learn how to be seductive, to create a space that draws her in, because as Shaunti said, she has to choose to step into that space. She has to allow her body to start to get aroused, which means she is aware of it. She's mindful of what's happening in her body. She has to view what you're doing as positive. He's doing this because he wants to connect with me, not because he's horny from what he saw today. Or, it has to be a positive experience couched in the context of consent and a safe relationship. Then the desire triggers on in her brain. Often I'll talk about, you may not be hungry for chocolate until somebody starts to talk about it and describe it. And then all of a sudden, now I'm hungry for chocolate. You can't tell me I'm not hungry for chocolate just because I wasn't before you started talking about it. That's a receptive type of desire. Mm-hmm. Once I consider it and I move into it and begin to embed myself in it, now I really do want it. And that's that second type of desire that we see. And as Shaunti said, it does, and you're reflecting there some too, Jay, that it does change with time. Over the weekend, I was crunching some of the data a little bit differently, just because I'm a geek and that's fun. And looking at the age changes in receptive versus initiating desire for men and for women. And as we as men get older, more and more of us tend to be more receptive in our desire. But very few men are receptive in their desire. Women tend to be more initiating in those first couple of years of marriage, and then it drops down and stays pretty stable for most of their marriage. Right around 30 years of marriage, we have this big bump. But it tends to stay fairly stable. But the inability to understand that difference and to talk about it is where we see a big part of the conflict.
That's the only thing that saved our sex life, was that we finally decided we've got to talk about this.
Right.
We cannot let it go. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult, but we've got to talk about it. And that really was one of the best things we ever did.
I think Bill has a question.
Well, I'm curious if there's a difference in gender when it comes to the receptivity of what you're sharing. When we say something, if I say to our family dog, "Do you wanna?" he instantly turns his head sideways and is very intrigued by whatever's coming next. And then if I don't fill that out with the rest of the question, like something he would want to do, then he just basically gives me the middle paw and lays back on the table.
Right.
In this realm, do you find that more men are kind of turning their head sideways, like, what are you talking about? Or more ladies? Is there a gender difference in being willing to take in the information that you're sharing in this practical field guide? Because it's such important information. I wonder if couples are getting it, or if it's just one half of the couples.
So you're asking not about the initiating versus receptive, but the interest in learning.
The concept as a whole, from maybe an academic or a clinical standpoint, isn't, on its surface, it's not scintillating. right? It's the
It's just
foundation. It's
interesting. Yeah.
it is. It's the
Yeah.
explanation. I'm wondering if there's a tune in versus tune out factor that's divided by gender.
Well, let's just say that when Jeff and I do marriage events, if we're talking to a male pastor about who's organizing it, he's always like, in on Saturday morning, could we like talk just a little bit about the intimacy topic? Like just like if you're comfortable, the women's ministry director doesn't usually ask that.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we're gonna
In
yes, here
in
we're gonna talk
terms
about
of the uniqueness of the receptivity, um, so this type of desire has been labeled differently throughout the decades, but it's been talked about in the sex therapy field since the 70s of an initiating and a receptive type of desire. I did my dissertation focused around it 25 years ago, and yet we do not have it down to where we're studying it at the level that you're talking about, Bill. Um, I suspect that there's going to be less of a gender bias in the nuances of initiating and receptive than there will be a personality and an individual bias. But it is very possible that there will be.
Well,
We don't know the answer to that yet.
about an age
and
bias.
also just to emphasize, in terms of the numbers of who is initiating and who is receptive, there is very clearly a gender
Right. And
relationship.
that was going to
Yeah.
be my question because we have dealt with this over the years with a lot of different couples. So when you were giving the information, Shaunti, you were most of the time, the majority, the
Yes.
initiator's the man, the receptor is the
That's
woman.
that's the sort of the archetype. That's
What
common.
happens when that's switched? That's
So
what we have a lot of couples that will come
for
up to us, and
sure.
talk to us about that because we kind of, I mean, we don't say it nearly as good as you guys say it, but we do talk about the men's desire is usually the sex drive is usually greater than the woman's, and the women come up and go, then what's wrong with me?
So let me just make sure that we understand something that's actually really important here. And Dr. Mike can fill this in, but there are two different things happening. What we're talking about are two completely different things. So you have a higher or lower sex drive, to sort of put it colloquially,
Levels of desire.
Right.
levels of desire. Okay. And in that case, I think it was, Mike, tell me if I'm wrong. I think it was about 25% of
Yeah,
women,
right about a quarter of the couples where the wife is the higher
the
level.
higher desire, higher
She has a
level.
more intense, maybe, is a
Yes.
way to say it.
Okay.
Yeah. So 1 out of 4, that is not a tiny number.
Mhm.
No.
Okay. That's actually that's a pretty big number. So think
It's
about,
interesting that that number has grown. When I did my dissertation 25 years ago, it was 20%. And we are seeing it slowly tick up, and we have lots of ideas why that is. But we do see that number
I
growing
think
a
it's
bit as
genetically
well.
modified food. That's what
it
That's one of
could
the
be,
theories,
you
actually.
never know.
Yeah.
That is probably one of the,
Uh-huh.
but there's a second thing that we're talking about. So level of desire is one thing. Type of desire is another thing.
Ah,
Okay. And
okay.
so that's the issue, is that we kind of think if it's not happening in our house as much as we want it to, there's just one reason why. It's that my spouse doesn't have as high of a sex drive as I do. Like that's kind of the
Right.
category you put it in. And
Right.
yeah, that could be true. I mean, that could be, but often it's not just about the level. It's about these two different types of
Right.
desire, the initiating and the receptive. You could have a receptive desire person who has a much higher desire
Mhm.
than their
they need to
spouse,
be wooed,
but they need to
Yeah,
be wooed.
right?
right.
Exactly.
So
Nice.
about just over 12% of couples, she has an initiating type, and he has a receptive type. So we do have a small number that is reversed like that. But as you've identified, the bulk of the wives that are complaining about it, their level is higher
Their level is
than their husbands.
Yeah.
And, and those are unique couples because, as Shanti started with, our cultural message, our cultural myth tends to be that men are always hungry for sex.
right.
So if my husband's not hungry for me, what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
Why does he not view me? Or what's wrong with me? that I'm always wanting it. And that shows up often in my office, and I look and say, nothing's broken, nothing's wrong with either of you. It's just in getting together, because we'll see that same wife, for example. This marriage ends where she was the low desire spouse. She gets into the next marriage, and now she's a high desire spouse. And she's like, what just happened? And it's just, you married somebody who has a lower level than you, is often what it is. It's not a statement about the marriage as much as it is about the individual personalities that come together.
This is the reason that when Dr. Mike and I, when we were doing the surveys, and we should explain, these are big, expensive, nationally representative surveys, right? These are not Facebook polls or whatever. I'm serious. Like, we need to say this. We spent a lot of money on this.
Sure.
But this is one of the reasons why, when we were kind of going through and looking at the data, there was such an interest in the fact that, I think Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 73% of couples couldn't really talk about this topic. And so they just hadn't connected these dots, because it's not like this is rocket science, right? Like, this is relatively simple. And yet, if you don't know how to have that conversation, it's just going to sit there and be bugging you, and like having these, your mind isn't blown because you just don't know it, or you think you talk about it but you actually don't. That was one of the other things that we learned, is we asked people and they're like, oh sure, we talk about this, no problem. And then like 3 questions later, it's like, do you ever tell your spouse if there's something they're doing, in bed that you don't like? No, 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 I wouldn't want to raise that. It's like, well, okay, you don't
Then you're
belong
not talking
in the
about-
yes, we talk about sex. You don't belong in that category. But that is a really key pivot point. I don't know, remember all the data. I bet Mike does, but it does have like a lot to do with satisfaction in marriage and all these other things. If you can
Huge.
talk about it.
When we start looking at this kind of data, the effect sizes, the impact that it has, can be fairly small. And we used a scale that, because as Shaunti says, couples will often tell us, oh, we talk openly about sex, but when we drill down to it, no, they don't. She always used to say, liar, liar, pants on fire. I thought that was hilarious. And so we used the dyadic sexual communication scale, and we tested it. And these couples come back, and the ones that truly were outliers, they did really well in talking about sex, 6.4 times more likely to report a high level of satisfaction. That is massive kind of numbers when we do this type of research. We saw a big impact in marital satisfaction. We saw a huge impact in frequency. All of these things were impacted by couples that just talk openly and well together about sexuality.
I'd love to ask a question about definitions. If I go to the doctor to have my heart checked and he comes back and says, I've got good news for you, everything is normal, or he checks out something and whatever, and you get the report back that it's all normal, you're feeling pretty good. In fact, you're probably going to hit right out and have some brisket, because you've been described as normal. So you've got a little leeway.
I can eat that. Yes.
Yeah, or, in any setting of life, the description of normal is not the worst thing in the world. It sounds to me like, in this context, being labeled as a normal couple is a sign that you're part of a group dysfunction, right? So normal shouldn't be what we're aspiring to. Am I reading that correctly?
So that is one of the arguments in our field, Bill, is, do we define something as normal, and is that okay? Or, but it's still causing distress. Can we help people with it?
Yeah.
And for me, if there's distress that's going on, I want to step in and help a couple to resolve it, because it may mean they need to be abnormal for the distress to be resolved. But to point to my spouse and say they're broken, something's wrong with them, and that's why we have a problem, to look and say, no, your spouse is normal. They're not broken. It's the way the two of you are coming together or not coming together that's the problem. Neither one of you are broken or wrong. That's what, to me, there's value there in saying that, just to pick on Jay and Laura, Laura is normal, Jay is normal, but they had to figure out how to bring two people together to have a rich sexual relationship, whether they're normal or not. And that takes individual work. That takes communicating effectively and well with each other.
I will say, Bill, and answer my version of the answer to that, which is much less well put together than what Mike just said, is that we found data-wise, 79% of couples have a mismatch in desired frequency. And like this causes a lot of heartache and conflict and, whatever. That's just that simple thing of one person wanting more intimacy than is happening. And so standing up on stage and telling people, here's a graph, 79% of people in this category, if that's you, you're normal. There's actually power in that. And so it kind of depends on what you mean by normal. But yes, it is very normal to have differences in this area.
You're normal, but you got to do something about it.
Yes.
Okay, so if we take the kind of the general where we are definition of normal, and now we inject into that this insidious influence in our culture that is not Hollywood, but it's more Simi Valley, where they're shooting the pornography that has, in some cases, been voluntarily brought into marriages, and in other cases, it's been brought in through the hidden realm, and it's really fueled the unrealistic expectations of all of that. Can you kind of share with our audience what impact you have seen all of that make on couples that are desiring greater intimacy together, but maybe one of them has been fueling a prurient side of this whole thing that's never going to work out well?
Well, anytime we are taught a message that is inaccurate and we bring that in as an expectation, we're going to have problems. Be that an expectation that comes in from the fantasy teaching that pornography has, or a Hollywood kind of a culture has, or the fantasy teaching that a church culture has. Both of those kind of sides, we work with people who come from a variety of different ultra-conservative backgrounds, be that Christian or Orthodox Jewish or Muslim, and those conservative mythologies that come into marriage are highly destructive. So you're right, the issue is the expectations we bring. If we've learned sex through looking at the fantasy of pornography, which that's what it is, it's designed to tie into fantasy, to draw us deeper in, and it creates that sense of normal that's not really normal. It's fantasy. We step in and we expect our spouse to be like my fantasy. I've been reading all of these erotic novels all through my teenage years. I expect my husband to be like these kind of guys, and I thought I chose one of those, and he's not. That creates a disruption. And then couples fail to talk about it and find a resolve. I do agree that the norm is dysfunction, but that's not what we're called to. That's not what we're capable of. Many times couples will sit across from me and say, what you're asking me to do is not normal. Right. And what you're asking for is exceptional. And I think it's good to ask for an exceptional sex life. But that takes us being something other than normal to pursue it. And let's learn how.
That's come to my mind is, and I need a caveat here, I am not endorsing what I'm about to say. This is just an observation. I'm beginning to understand affairs better because of if a woman has a higher sex drive but still has that need for the as a receptor, and some guy at work says, man, your hair looks nice today, boom, I'm right. Or if a guy has a higher sex drive and his wife is not receiving well and he finds someone who equally has a high sex drive, boom. Now again, I'm not endorsing that, but it makes it easier to understand how quickly the dysfunction can grab a hold of people and send them down a black hole.
You fit my fantasy.
Right.
Oh, right,
Yes.
exactly.
Right. You fit
Yes,
my fantasy.
yes, and that it's funny because again, our life, we'll just put it out there. For the first 25 years of our marriage, Laura, you said this to me frequently: "Stop groping me, stop groping me, stop groping me," and I didn't see it that way, but that was how she received it.
Right.
And so I worked
He thought
really,
it was affection.
right. I worked really, really hard. I did. I was, I'm trying to be like Christ. I'm trying to honor my wife. And the kids leave the house and we love to make dinner together. And one night we're making dinner together and these words come out of my wife's mouth. Why don't you grope me anymore? I'm like, okay, wait. And I just think that there are seasons in every marriage where things, they don't change, but they shift. And there's just these minor shifts in what we need or desire. And she wasn't telling me to grope her, but she was saying, I'm a receptor and I need something right now to help me begin this process.
There's
So
more
Well, the
testosterone in my body at that point.
that may have been as well, but you identified a huge part of it too, Jay. Not only is it what's happening, but what we attribute that to, the meaning we make of it, the story that we tell. You were telling the story of I am being affectionate with my wife. Her body is attractive and I want to touch it. I want to play with it. And her story was, you're just groping me. You're not honoring me. You're not cherishing me. Well, those two stories are incongruent with each other. So they're going to create a problem. Well, the only way we can find a we story is for the couple to talk together to understand. When she says, you're groping me, no, I'm not. Okay, it just fell apart.
Mhm.
Well, help me to understand, and we talk a lot about curiosity in the book. Help me to understand why that feels like groping. Is there a way that I could touch you and enjoy your body that would not feel like groping? Is there
because
a
I
way I
find
can
your
show
ankles
affection?
attractive for crying out loud. Your ankles turn me on.
Right.
And so, but
And that
that's
is a good thing. We
right,
want that.
But we've got again, it comes back to the communication that so many couples find it difficult, whether it's upbringing or current culture or just personality type. They don't want to talk about these things, but the more you talk about them, at least our experience has been, the more satisfying your intimate life becomes.
As long as it's a healthy, honoring, respectful, curious conversation.
Right.
Some couples will engage in it and it's a demanding, it's a critical, they're trying to overpower. Or one will engage in it and take the withdrawal, or I just have to roll over and do whatever you want type of approach. Those types of communication don't work. But if both treat each other as honored partners and we care for and we're curious about each other and we're trying to understand each other, yes. So many of the couples, all I have to do is create the space for them and encourage them to talk, give a little bit of coaching to keep them at the table, and they figure it out and they do it in an amazing way.
Yes.
And that's really what we designed the book for. To put a little bit of a plug in here, is I told Shaunti, I ask couples to read a book out loud to each other and to discuss it. And that is um, the most profound, the most transformative thing that I ask couples to do. So we wrote this with the goal of a couple setting down and using it to spark conversation. We are giving them the language. They don't have to create it. We're giving them the
Right.
questions. They don't have to create it. We're saying these are normal problems. And they can go, that's not a problem for us. What do you mean? It is for me. Why do you think it's not a problem? Now we've got communication that's going on.
And
We
and I love how you put it. This is not a sex manual.
no,
Right.
And there are plenty of
no.
those out there, and there's some healthy
Mhm.
ones out there.
Yep.
There's probably some unhealthy ones. I don't know, but we've read a few books on sex, but this is, you talk about 8 secrets, and I want to know the secrets. What are these 8 secrets?
Well, like what we were just talking about, right? Initiating receptive desire. That's one of the secrets, right?
Yeah.
The need to be able to talk about it. And whoa, talking makes such a big difference. That's one of the secrets. The impact of curiosity, like he
Mhm.
was just talking about. Like that's one of the secrets. Another one that always gets me is the impact of having some sort of a signal. Because one of the things we heard over and over in the research is like, and I'm being stereotypical, but there's a reason, the husband is kind of expecting something to happen later. And, he's kind of got an idea in his mind. And then he's like, wait, what? Like he's really disappointed. And to have some sort of a way of signaling, how are you feeling tonight? And, all these like classic different, we heard so many good stories about different ways that people would signal that. Like one of the things that I thought was hilarious was, I have a podcast with Family Life, that, marriage stuff. And Brian Goins, my co-host on that podcast, he was like, he and his wife, and he said this out loud. I'm not telling anything out of school, right? But he said he and his wife, they had candles on each of their nightstands. And one of them would light the candle and be like, kind of the candle being lit was like, and what do you think? And sometimes the other one would light their candle and be like, all right. And sometimes they would go over and blow it out.
Okay, so we have a signal in our home. It's called snoring. But have you noticed a generational difference in doing this better? Is it younger couples who are willing to dive in and learn the foundation, or is it older couples who are like, okay, we've done this probably the unhealthy way for 30 plus years. Now let's change our ways. Is there any generational stratification to that?
Everybody is just as interested.
Okay.
I mean, because there's nothing magic about being married 30 years that suddenly tells you, oh, wait, my wife is like making a mental decision about whether to get engaged with me based on how she feels about me the rest of the day. Like, if you don't know that, you don't know that.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's obviously, the longer you marry, the more likely you are to have like learned that you have to talk about stuff. So there's probably some data there that needs to be analyzed, but we see all generations as needing this and all generations as being interested in. I don't know, Mike, if you have a different opinion on that.
I'm going to look into that, Bill, because it's a curious question. Do we see my experience would say that we don't. A younger generation talks about it differently, but not necessarily better.
Well, when we did the data analysis, I did analyze the curiosity numbers from age and I think from length of marriage. I'd have to go back and look at it. But I don't remember seeing anything that was like a massive difference. But yeah, let me know if you find something.
Well, and the main reason
we do see an age difference in frequency and satisfaction, that it continually drops to about 20-25 years worth of marriage. That's kind of the low point. And then 30 to 35 years is almost as high as the honeymoon, which we see that in marital satisfaction and sexual satisfaction and frequency. Which one leads which, we don't know. But there's plenty talked about in the literature around those patterns. In terms of communication, I think that would be worth taking a deeper look into.
Yeah. Mike loves going in front of a group of people to present this data chart. And he's like, it goes down, frequency goes down, goes down. Oh, wait, like it jumps back up here. And guess what happens in your 50s or whatever? It's like, wait, the kids are gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Back when I was a youth speaker, and I don't know if I used this statistic, but I don't know if it was accurate or not, but it was effective. I quoted some study that said the most sexually satisfied people on the planet. Okay. So we're talking sexual satisfaction, were females in their late 40s in a long-term monogamous relationship. And, talk to the kids about it's not the 20-somethings hooking up at the bar. It's not the 30-somethings who are living together. It's your mother, but
I'm sure everybody was like, ew.
Exactly.
Kids puked all over the place.
But to realize that this, again, all of faith life is a journey. It's a journey. And even in this, if we can get younger people to realize that you're on a journey towards some really great stuff, if you'll keep walking through the hard times. And that was basically what we had to do. Was we walked through some really difficult times. And I mean, I'll never forget one night I said to Laura, "Are you going to make love to your book tonight or to me?" Because it would just that had become the pattern that we were in. And I'm not proud to say that. I'm not trying to throw her under the bus, because it was equally my fault for not understanding
You're
what
falling asleep downstairs.
right. All that kind of stuff. But boy, the further down the road you get and realize the beautiful gift that it is, it's no longer about sex. It's about connecting and nurturing and really loving each other in a deep way.
It's also about learning. If I can use your example there, Jay, you were asking for an intimate connection, but that was way not a seductive way to do it.
Really?
To say, are you going to make love to your book or to me? That's a message of, are you going to have sex with me? Because that's all that matters. Well, she's going to look over, and most women are going to go, not with you. Not with that kind of an attitude. Not right. Not with that
I've got a
approach.
better guy here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So, part of one of my mentors used to say that couples can't have great sex until 30 years of monogamous sex with each other, that it takes that long to learn how to communicate well, how to realize this is not about our bodies first. This is about the connection. It's about the intimacy. And we reflect that in our spirits, in our hearts, and in our bodies. We talk in chapter 10 about keeping it incarnate, keeping it fully spirit and fully body. And it takes most couples years to learn how to do that well.
I don't disagree with that at all, because by the time you get to 30 years, you can't focus on your body anymore.
That's part of the beauty of it, is if I'm still going to connect, it has to be about something else, because my body is no longer as reliable as it was when I was 18.
Right.
Or looks the way it did when
There's still a sex pack under there somewhere.
What sort of reception are you getting in the church realm? Jay mentioned at the very outset of this conversation that I think it was Jay that said that the churches aren't really discussing this at all, certainly not from the pulpit, and rarely in special get-togethers. I think that Jay and Laura do their date nights, and they have those mini retreats, which are awesome. I don't think they're happening as much on a broad scale as maybe they would have. You guys know this better than I do, but maybe 15, 20 years ago. How about when you present it from this research standpoint, from a kind of a more academic standpoint? Are you getting doors opened at churches to have this discussion? I know that we like to pretend that everybody who goes to church has it all figured out, but on the off chance that we don't, are you invited in?
That's for you, Shaunti. I speak more in the professional realm. You speak more in the church realm.
He does so much. He does so many events that are basically like speaking to pastors groups and training pastors and sex therapists and that kind of stuff. Yeah, one of the things that Jeff, my husband, and I have found in the marriage event space is that this is very much a desired conversation, despite the joke about the women's ministry director not asking about it and the male pastor asking about it. It is accurate. Like having the data and being able to, could you add this in to the marriage event? Like that is very frequently requested, which is great. Like it's great to hear. It's great to see that people are interested in that. Now, maybe because of we're not sex therapists, we very rarely get invited to do an event just on this. Like this is part of a broader marriage conversation. Whereas Dr. Mike gets invited to talk about just this all the time.
But when we do, to answer your question from my experience, Bill, I've had many times that, just thinking of one group in particular, though I could name several, they said we do an annual marriage event, and the wives are always dragging their husbands to these events. And, we have, 300 couples that show up, and we announce yours, and the husbands are going to their wives going, finally, they're talking about sex. Come on, we're going. And the wives go, no, we don't need that one. And they're like, we had half the people show up for your talk. What's wrong with you? And I'm like, well, the point is the subject is scary to people. We've been taught so many times we don't talk about it, or so many people believe I'm going to show up and you're going to tell me that there's something broken and wrong with me. Because that's the message that I keep hearing in my marriage. I can't hear that from a professional standing up front. I don't need more pressure. And they don't realize that the truth of it, the myth of it gives more pressure. The truth of it removes pressure.
Yeah.
And so we step in to teach it. I will say we had a church that said, would you come in and do a talk on healthy sexuality in marriage? And we set it up that we advertised it to everyone within, I want to say it was a 7-mile radius of the church. And they just did a blast. We're going to talk about sex this weekend. We've got a retreat that's going on. Over 50% of the people that showed up to this event were not a part of that church. And they were like, what did we do well? And I said, you talked about something that people are hurting. And at the end of the event, they had signups for small groups. 30% of that 50% signed up for a small group. They wanted more conversation about the subject. And so I think a healthy message is one that people are hungry for. It's just, unfortunately, the church is often teaching one that is not filled with truth and is not a healthy message. It is filled with more guilt and shame or poor expectations, because a lot of the people that are talking about it are not well trained in it.
Right.
Okay, this is triggering a memory from about 15 years ago. So back in the day when, I don't know if you remember my original books, Jay and Laura, but when For Women Only and For Men Only first came out about understanding men and understanding women, and because this topic was one of the topics with Mike's advice back then, one of the things that a lot of pastors did, which got a great reception, and this is to your question, Bill, is there were probably about maybe at least 30 or 40 churches that I'm aware of, and I know it was probably dozens more than this. There was this trend of having a Sunday morning sermon series called Pure Sex. And it would, like, they went for, 5-6 weeks on sexuality and, what the Bible says versus what the culture says and how to have a great relationship. And of course they called it Pure Sex because, they wanted
that
people to
sells.
come. Yeah. And one of the things that was pretty common is that the pastors would bring me in and interview me on stage as the sermon time so it's still their message, but I'm kind of in that sort of, I'm bringing in a expert data perspective or whatever. And it was, and that would just be one of the sermon series weeks, but the churches were always packed.
Yeah.
Like it just drew people in. Although I will say it was weird. Like I was in Arizona driving down the road and I see a billboard that says Pure Sex with Shaunti Feldhahn. I'm like, because they advertise these, week by week, they advertise these. I'm like, okay,
They should have put on that Pure Sex with Shaunti Feldhahn, Lucky Jeff. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, I'm like, no. So can we?
Well, it's interesting. Right along these lines, our pastor this Easter, his Easter sermon was the first in a 5-week series on marriage and sexuality.
Using the Song of Solomon.
So, Easter attendance is here. We saw no drop off for the next 5 weeks.
There you go.
Because
I thought you were going to say, and he's loving his new church now.
No, but if for lack of a better illustration, it's scratching an itch.
Yeah.
It's an issue for every marriage. It's a constant developing, situation in every marriage. And we're hungry for authentic relationship in this husband and wife experience. And when we taste it, we know it, but it can be fleeting. And so we're constantly looking for ways to improve every aspect of our marriage, especially intimacy.
As we wind down our time together, just a kind of a personal question to our two guests. When was it in your lives that you decided to head this direction. I can't imagine, Dr. Sytsma, that as you were a young boy growing up, you thought, I think someday, I know I'm only 9 years old now, but I think someday I'm going to be a leading sex therapist and researcher. I can't wait to tell grandma about this. When did the Lord call you into this? When did you feel this call, this passion?
That's a longer answer or a longer story, but I will tell you that even 5 years ago, I didn't want to be in this position. So to say that I didn't envision it, 40 years ago when I started my career, I definitely didn't. But in '90, I was trained as an addictions therapist. In '90, I started working with sex addicts and saw the amount of pain and amount of struggle that was going on. When I fell in love with doing marriage work as a pastor in the mid '90s, I wanted to begin working with marriage. And so many couples were wrestling with pain in the sexual realm that I just kept on going back and getting training. And then people started coming and saying, "We want to know what you know." So we began doing teaching and training professionals, and I put together a school that trains professionals in working with sexual issues and trains pastors. So God slowly drew me into where he wanted me to be. I think if he'd have told me this is what I want you to do, the answer would have been a hard no. Because people get uncomfortable. People struggle with wait, you're a conservative pastor who does sex therapy. Yeah, we don't know what to do with that. And you push all of our buttons. But as I said, this is an area that so much pain happens in. It's truly been an honor to step in and to hear couples' stories and wrestle with them and how to reflect God, his nature, relationship in this arena.
Hmm.
It's really rich and good. So today I'm grateful for it, but that's been a recent development in my life and career.
And Shaunti, what's your story?
For me, it was pretty simple. It was in this topic, having seen it so often in the interviews and in the prior research, and the not just the pain, which there is a lot of heartache and stuff, but also the opportunity. Like once people understand each other in this area, it's like, oh my word, like there's so much more richness in our relationship now. And we had so many misunderstandings that didn't have to be there. And we would see and some of this was via Dr. Mike's advice over all the years, as we'd put various things in the books. And candidly, we would see and hear of so many people saying, oh my gosh, that chapter, that book, it saved our marriage. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. If a 200-page book can save a marriage, or a 30-page chapter can save a marriage, there are a lot of tragically unnecessary divorces going on.
Yes.
Just, from people not knowing some of these things. And so that's really the reason why we wanted to jump into it, is because some of this stuff is really simple, not rocket science. And these little things, they really can make a difference, as you said, Jay, and something that affects literally every marriage.
Mhm.
Well, and I hope our listeners have sensed this throughout our conversation. The two of you have been uniquely gifted to talk about this subject without making it anything but palatable. I mean, it is so easy to take in what you're saying without judgment, without recourse, without any kind of, oh my gosh, they're pointing their finger at me. And I think part of that is the way God has designed you as people and gifted you as people. And I rejoice in that there are people like yourselves who can present this material in such a way that it is it's meat to chew on. I mean, really, it's not milk, it's meat, and it is stuff that any follower of Christ, I don't mean to point fingers, but I'm pretty good at it. But any follower of Christ that doesn't want to improve the intimacy in their marriage, you need to have a long talk with Jesus, because this is Christ in the church. You know what I'm saying? This is the example, and what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah, it's hard work, and it's never easy. But thank you so much for who you are, as much as what you're talking about, because I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, can't thank the two of you enough for joining us. We will put in the notes below, we will put the link to the book, and make sure that we can connect our audience to the work that you have so capably done. And thank you for investing in couples. This is, as I think Shaunti mentioned earlier, this is not easy work. This is oftentimes expensive, always time consuming, and it's so badly needed. So we really appreciate that. Thank you to everybody who's joined us for either the video version on our YouTube channel at Marriage Talk, or for the 2 episodes of the podcast on the audio side of things. Whatever the case may be, our prayer is that you will be drawn closer together and realize that what you have just heard is a practical field guide that can help take you from disconnection to delight. And that's a wonderful blessing for sure. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you next time on
Guys.
Marriage Talk.